So today, our third mini retreat, we'll be exploring the second factor of awakening. We spent the first two mini retreats exploring mindfulness, the first and overarching factor of awakening. And today, the second factor of awakening will be what we'll focus on. And that is investigation and discrimination of states, investigation and discrimination of the objects that we're mindful of. And the underlying question being, what is the active component of mindfulness that is a primary root of the arising of wisdom? What is the active component of mindfulness that is the primary root of the arising of awakening? And the answer to that is investigation. So what is it that enables us to move towards being a Buddha? We're all moving towards being a Buddha. Or as one of my Burmese teachers, Sayadaw U Pandita, used to say, what makes one a true heir of the Buddha? So in response to this question, I'd like to begin with just a brief review of mindfulness. So considering for a moment, as we discussed in our exploration of mindfulness, have you ever had the experience of getting to know someone and finding that in fact, they're not at all like what your initial preconditioned perceptions and judgments of them were? I think we've all probably had that experience. Without mindfulness, we're quite often caught unaware. And that part of the sentence is important, caught unaware in our initial perceptions of and reactions to things. Why? Because we're pretty blindly run by our conditioned habitual ways a fair amount of the time, until we're not blindly run by our conditioned ways. Without a mindful presence, we could say that our relationship to most all of our experience is like that. Everything we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, everything we think is immediately interpreted back to us in conformity with our habitual thought patterns and our habitual ways of experiencing everything. So what does this mean? It means that we're living at a distance from experience. It means that we're living at a distance from life itself. And it can be kind of like a vicious circle that feeds itself, feeding the mental fixations that we're running on, our habit running. The grooves of habit with that kind of life etch in deeper and deeper and deeper. So we're more and more often just running on kind of automatic pilot and not realizing that this is what's occurring, not realizing that our life can be very different from this. Mindful presence is a very powerful way of changing our mind, very powerful way of changing our heart. Consequently, changing the way that we relate to ourselves, the way that we relate to other people, things, situations, as we live our lives in the world. So connecting with an open-hearted interest and focused, clear awareness is what's needed in all instances. And the Buddha said, it is what's needed as a seasoning of salt is needed in all sauces. That was one of his descriptions. This is what begins and what allows the process of release and the transformation of our painful and unskillful habits. So you can certainly see that why the Buddha said that mindfulness is the first and the overarching factor of our practice. the first and overarching factor of awakening. So as a basis for our exploration of investigation today, I'd like to repeat just the short definition of mindfulness that I offered last week in last week's exploration. Mindful awareness is about paying an extraordinary attention, an extraordinary kind of attention, a non-judging, non-manipulative, non-grasping, non-rejecting attention to the present moment's experience. And when this extraordinary attention of mindfulness is coupled with the qualities of a focused attention and an open-hearted, interested, investigative exploration, we're gifted. We're gifted for a moment, or maybe gifted for many moments, with what sometimes might feel like the magic of moving out of delusion, the magic of moving out of delusion and directly into reality. We're gifted with the opening into some degree of experiencing and knowing the true nature of things. For many of us, for many humans, and us too, we're all human. It's really not our usual way to be so present in the moment. And so, what are we doing? We're training the heart, we're training the mind to just simply connect, feel, see, and know what is. What is this? How is it right here? How is it right now? There's a term that's used in Buddhism, a Pali term called ehipassika, and that translates as come and see. Ehipassika, come and see. It's an invitation from the Buddha to come and see, not to come and believe, but to really come and see for ourselves what's true. To come and see in this way requires a great willingness, interest, and courage. And all of this includes a growing faith that blossoms right out of our own experience. A willingness, interest, and courage to look directly, deeply, and honestly into the body, the mind, the heart, without relying on what others say is true through what we may have heard or what we've read. To come and see in this way, ehipassika, to come and see in this way, requires that we don't settle into the inertia of our habitual perceptions of things. We don't settle into our habitual relationships to experience, and that we don't continue to cling on to an I, me, mine identification with our inner and our outer experience. This interest, willingness, and courage are the qualities that keep practice alive. From the very, very beginning of practice, and then ongoing through all the years of our practice. So I'd like to close this introduction for today's exploration with a poem from Rumi. It was given to me by a Buddhist nun many years ago, and I shared it with you towards the end of our first mini retreat a couple of weeks ago. Don't try to be the sun. Be a dust mote, lunar moth, love the candle, taste your life, put your shoes on, upside down. So we'll begin our sitting practice now, sitting comfortably in your seat, your meditation seat. on the floor, on a cushion, in a chair, maybe sitting on a couch, maybe standing. I don't know if any of you need to lie down to practice. That might be so. It's okay. So settling in. Settling into your body settling into the seat. Closing your eyes. Lightly, gently. Allowing the body, heart, and mind to relax. A mindful attention, connecting with the whole body sense of sitting. Very simple, no commentary needed. Sensing, feeling the posture, the whole body sitting. And with a willingness and interest, the active aspect of mindfulness being investigation. Noticing a sense of ease in the body or a sense of discomfort, of dis-ease. Noticing if there are areas in the body that are contracted, pressure, tightness. No commentary needed. Noticing how those areas soften or get tighter, maybe move or change in some way, disappear. Mindful attention to the breath, wherever it's most clearly and directly experienced sensorially in your body. And letting the breath, at least for the next bit of time, be your guide as we move into an open-hearted, open-minded investigation. How is the breath? An in-breath. Maybe experienced on the edges of the nostrils or between the nose and the upper lip, that space of skin. Or maybe experiencing the breath as movement in the abdominal area, in the belly. bringing an interest, a willing interest into the intimate connection with the experience of breath, coming close. How is it? Not how it should be or how you want it to be. How is it? Just simply noticing without commenting. And notice how it changes. This investigative, mindful investigative relationship with the experience of breathing as it happens on its own. Notice maybe you're trying to control the breath, make it a certain way. Notice that without commentary. Notice it. Let it be. Receiving the breath just as it is. How is it? Not trying to get something, not trying to get to a certain place or a certain type of perception. A very receptive relationship with the sensorial experience of breathing. Investigation is an art in noticing and sensing where the clearest connection can be. Like focusing a camera or a microscope. Each of these wonderful metaphors for the process of investigation. When you find yourself lost in thought or maybe struggling with what's happening, simply mindfully noticing this. And then you can play with adjusting the focus of your attention. Struggling, what is that experience? Bodily, mentally. Lost in thought or spacing out, what is that experience? Mentally, physically. You might open up the senses and let go of any agendas that you may have decided or developed around this second factor of awakening, investigating. Let go of your agenda. And just see if you can receptively recognize, sense, and feel into what currents, physical or mental currents, are pulling or driving you at the moment. Bodily currents, mental currents, emotional currents. Not getting lost in the stories. Letting go of the story and opening up to what's underneath. What's underneath a memory, a plan, maybe mental states of fear or anticipation or joy. What does that feel like? How is that sensed in the body, in the mind? Perhaps you're trying too hard to connect with some object. What does trying too hard feel like? Maybe there's actually a more subtle mood or internal weather system going on to be mindful of, to receive, perceive, and know. At times, investigating might mean stepping back, opening the lens, allowing the attention to rest in the recognition of what might just simply be some vague discomfort, some vague confusion, or a sense of ease, a sense of calm. Receptivity, willingness, interest. courage to just be with what is. Not looking in order to get rid of something or to get something. Trust what needs to be connected to, sensed, seen, known, learned, and understood. All will very naturally arise within the open-hearted, open-minded exploration of mindful investigation. relaxed, receptive. Interest, courage, mindful, investigative presence right here, right now. Body, heart, mind, with things just as they are. May all of the wholesome energies and the fruits that manifest through our practice serve with immeasurable impartiality, without bias, without prejudice, towards the welfare, the happiness, and the awakening of all beings everywhere. And so now it's time for walking meditation, 10 minutes, or stretching, mindful stretching. You can stretch in your chair. You can stand up, you can move around, move your body. And stay mindful and allow this quality, this capacity of investigation to be part of your movement practice. Keep it going. Connecting directly and intimately with the sensorial experiences of walking, moving, stretching, and noticing the mental content or relationship. No need to comment, no need to analyze. Simple, mindful, investigative presence. And in 10 minutes, we'll reconnect and I'll offer some Dhamma reflection. So offering a Dhamma reflection. I think we're all back now. Settling into your seat, settling into ear doors open, receiving sound. Investigation. Investigation is one of the energizing awakening factors. It has the potential to dispel darkness, the darkness of not seeing, the darkness of ignoring how it is. Investigation is what leads to the elimination of bewilderment, of confusion, of not seeing, not knowing, the not knowing of delusion, the not knowing of ignorance, of ignoring. Investigation has the potential to penetrate and to illumine things. With this bright light of investigation and clear discernment, what is already and has always been present is then clearly seen, is known, and confusion is dispelled. Our practice, in our practice, investigation means that we experience directly, meaning without mediation, without concept, we experience directly. So, for example, and please take note that this can be a metaphor for any physical or any mental phenomena. The rising and falling movement of a breath is known. Maybe you see it and know it at the level of just simply knowing in and simply knowing out. This is still based in the world of concept. So investigation without putting on the glasses, so to say. Then you put on the metaphorical glasses, connecting simply and directly with the actual rising and falling movement of a breath in the belly, or the actual experience of the touch sensations around the edges of the nostrils or in the space between the nostrils and the upper lip. So beginning now to move from conceptualizing the breath to direct experience of the breath. Maybe beginning to feel, see, sense, and know pressure, extension, roughness, smoothness, lightness. With any of these sensation experiences being felt and known as occurring maybe for a short time or maybe for a longer time. And then you look through the microscope with the lowest power lens. The whole rising movement or the whole in-breath experience at the nostrils is sensed, felt, and known from its beginning all the way to its end. You feel and know, for instance, the whole falling movement or the whole sensorial experience of an out-breath from its beginning all the way to its end. And maybe, much to your surprise, you find that each rising and falling, each in and out, isn't necessarily this smooth, ongoing experience that you've been used to. Even though it might be quite subtle, maybe you begin to feel it and know it very clearly as happening in tiny segmented sensations rather than a smooth flow. And now, as you come even closer, you're even more intimate with the experience of breathing, the experience of the rising and falling or the in and out. You begin to see it as just simply happening on its own, without you controlling it. The heart, mind, and body are relaxed and interested in what's occurring, not thinking about it, just simply present, receptive, and wholly interested, deeply interested. And as you relax even more, with interest growing even brighter, the microscope's lens powers up. The idea or the concept of breath falls away. The heart mind is settled and collected. Potential distractions have little or maybe no attraction. The subtle sensations at or just below the nostrils or the rising and falling movement in the belly is felt and known. With maybe the most predominant experience at this point being a particular subtle flavor of light vibration with each rising and falling, with each in and out experience. Who's breathing? Who's breathing? And on it goes. Breath isn't what you thought it was, at least for the moments that you've stopped thinking about it and are just simply directly and mindfully present with it, clearly discerning the experience with a deep and complete trust in those moments. A trust that this is just enough. Nothing else needs to be done. The mind, heart is open, receptive, spacious, and at ease in this direct and very simple connection to experience. As investigation and clear discernment continues to develop, and the way of things continues to reveal itself. This is our practice. This is our training. In relationship to this factor of investigation and clear discernment, I'd like to spend a bit of time now exploring our practice life and our life as a whole as our practice. And our life as a whole, we could say, as a creative process with mindfulness and focused attention, and particularly investigation being the roots from which stem these beautiful blossoms of wisdom and the creative energy of one's life that's freed up through the fruits of our practice. Practice is actually quite akin to the creative process. And as we know, practice is a vehicle for peeling away the layers of our habitual conditioned perceptions and reactions. It's a vehicle that has great potential for revealing the interdependent and selfless nature of all physical and mental phenomena. So, for instance, whether it be the immediacy and spontaneity of a moment-to-moment visceral or mental connection and response in relationship to the body moving, or via seeing what's seen, heard, smelled, tasted, touched, without interposing the self, me, mine, I. In other words, connecting things with things directly. With our life as our practice. It's in a sense about forgetting what we've previously learned. And what does this mean? Forgetting what we've previously learned. It means forgetting what we think we know about the subject, which is actually a necessary step in seeing and knowing body-mind phenomena, body-heart-mind phenomena more directly and clearly, and then responding appropriately. This so-called forgetting, and it's probably not the way most of you think of the word forgetting, but this so-called forgetting, it stops the mind from knowing in its habitual, conditioned ways. And so at this point, one is confronted with the object itself, and one's usual way of knowing is arrested. The heart, the mind is open, receptive, appreciative, able to connect and respond to the inner experience, be it a mental or physical experience, connecting to the tone, the shape, the texture, etc. And also very much connecting to its changing nature, the changing nature of our experience, and connecting with a genuine quality of confidence and open-hearted authority. This is our possibility. This is our practice. So what is it that keeps this open-minded, open-hearted being in the presence from happening? One person's response to this question was the fear of losing control. The fear of losing control. I think it's fair to say that many people experience not knowing as feeling dumb. But I have to say that some of the most extraordinary experiences that I've had in which truth was revealed to me have all had the quality of what we could call bearing witness, of just simply being there, of just simply being here with humility and a tremendous and yet relaxed interest, a very open-hearted, connected, mindful, and discerning attention. And no need to make meaning. No need to make meaning. In our practice and in our life as our practice, until we can suspend the need for making meaning all the time, we cannot experience direct revelation. We cannot experience insight. We're not able to experience wisdom. And I well know that it's not so easy to be so unarmed, meaning to be without our habitual ways and our self-centered identification. Fear can sometimes leap up in us. And so we train the heart, we train the mind slowly and with great care to see very clearly and to let go. The poet Rilke exhorts us to return to things themselves. But the way to them can be difficult as we're faced with our self, our seemingly set and solid self. It seems that we're overtrained regarding ourselves. What does that mean? We're overtrained regarding ourselves. We're usually the center of our attention. It's usually all about me, right? Consequently, it's very difficult to come and see, as the Buddha invites us, ehipasika, to return to things themselves, beyond or underneath or without this notion of a self. Engaging in our practice with a joyful interest and open-hearted mindfulness is the way towards freeing up honesty, authenticity, and energy, which creates the conditions that allow direct revelation, allow insight, allow wisdom to arise. I've learned a lot from children in this arena. In my early 30s, I taught art at an alternative school for quite a number of years. The 5 to 8-year-olds just loved to paint. And sometimes I would ask them to paint in relationship to a particular theme, but often it was just free expression painting. And one morning, as I was walking around and looking and commenting on paintings in process and on those paintings that were already finished, one little boy came up to me and said, "You always like our paintings. How come?" Well, this little boy noticed something and he asked the right question. How come? Children do sometimes have the way of saying things that kind of stop us in our tracks. Yes, I do, I thought. How come? Well, this was a long time ago, but I don't remember exactly what I said to him, but something about honesty and expressing from the inside, and how could I not feel anything but appreciation? I could ask questions and occasionally make some suggestions, but there wasn't anything to dislike or feel critical about, because what each person painted was their honest expression at that moment. Well, this little boy seemed to understand. And he was standing right in front of me and he shook his head up and down and he kind of beamed at me. So, making a bit of a stretch and regarding this in relationship to our practice, as adults, can we be so unarmed in relationship to what occurs within us, with the attitude that this is what's happening right here, right now, while at the same time with a very honest interest being mindful and seeing clearly with an open-hearted receptivity to the right answers that will inevitably show up to our perennial questions regarding the way towards being really, truly happy and at ease in this life. Can we be so unarmed? One of the creative endeavors that's been part of my life off and on over the years, since I was in my early 20s, is making portrait sculpture, with a particular person being the live model for each piece of work. This work has been a very deep and powerful direct practice in and of itself, as well as a metaphor of insight practice for me, particularly in relationship to the cultivation of mindfulness, investigation, and discernment, effort, joy, tranquility, concentration, and wisdom, the 7 factors of awakening, the 7 factors of enlightenment. So I'd like to share just a little bit of this, as I think it may be a useful illustration in the context of our discussion today. In order to create a likeness of a person in clay, a tremendous depth of concentration and mindful investigation has to take place. A head, its shape, the neck and shoulders, the facial features. How to see it as a whole and then know it both in its wholeness and its particulars, so that the seeing and knowing can be transferred through the eyes, mind, heart, and body, out through the hands and out through the fingers into the clay. Well, a daunting and actually impossible task if one doesn't begin to see what one is looking at simply as hundreds, maybe thousands of relationships that actually change with each angle of seeing. And so the subject's head and face begins to break down into a series of relational forms that exist only in relationship to each other. There's no head, no face, no person as we ordinarily know it. There's just a series of relationships being known. And it's a very intimate process, much more so than if I just keep looking at the whole form. The completely unique characteristics of the face in front of me become very clearly and deeply known, but not as any fixed or separate entity. And the universals of all human faces become known quite intimately. At the same time, the concepts of solidity, fixedness, separateness lose their habitual potency and actually quite thoroughly fall away in moments. What is a nose? This eye, this chin, any nose, any eye, any chin. Seeing and knowing through the microscope of an open-hearted and deeply connected mindful investigation from revolving angles, moment by moment by moment. Seeing and knowing the space between the inside corner of an eye in relationship to the downward slope of the eye's lower edge and the corner of the skin around the eye. In relationship to the bulging curvature of the eyeball as it rounds out to touch the outer edge and the corner of the skin around the eye, and on and on and on. With all of this seeing and knowing coming out of my fingers and forming the clay little by little. And as though magically, a face emerges out of the clay. A face that in fact bears the likeness and projects some of the quality of the liveliness of this human being sitting in front of me. It's not really so easy to render this creative process in words. In fact, it's kind of difficult. So I hope that it's been at least somewhat communicated and helpful for you. During one particular time period when I was quite deeply immersed in portrait sculpture work, I went to see a movie at the theater. And I was quite struck that evening by all the faces of all of the people in the lobby of the theater, each one having all of the same equipment, if you will, meaning eyes, nose, ears, mouth, cheeks, chins, foreheads. And yet each person's face was totally, totally unique, just based in the tiny nuances of how all of the parts were interrelated. My awareness that evening, jumping back and forth, seeing the diversity in the unity or in the one, and the unification or the one in the diversity. That evening, they weren't separate. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, the flower ornament sutra, which is revered as a treasure of sensual imagery and considered the highest teaching of the Buddha in Chinese Mahayana Buddhism, there's a short section in that sutta, the Avatamsaka Sutra, the flower ornament sutra, that elaborates on my very brief, small experience that evening. And the sutra says, the Bodhisattva sees the interdependent nature of all things, sees in one Dharma all Dharmas, sees in all Dharmas the one Dharma, sees the multiplicity in the one and the one in the multiplicity, sees the one in the immeasurable and the immeasurable in the one, the immeasurable meaning the indescribable whole of life as it unfolds. And the sutra goes on, birth and existence of all dharmas is of a changing nature and thus unreal and cannot touch the enlightened ones. The nature of things quite naturally reveals itself. It's not hidden. As we enter into the mystery through the intimacy, the great intimacy of our practice, rather than staying at a distance, rather than staying separate from it, the nature of things quite naturally reveals itself. In very precise and sometimes minute ways, or at times through a more spacious, less precise mode of mindfulness and investigation, we come to know the nature of things. Anything, all things, ordinary things. For a moment, we touch into the absolute truth of the relative world, and it makes a difference on how we live our life. Mindfulness, investigation, and discernment are our guides through what at times might feel like an impenetrable forest of experience. And as each of you well know, life can be quite challenging and quite difficult at times. Practice can be quite challenging and quite difficult at times. Not new news to any of you. And along the way, we find that it takes a very deep willingness, and as I said earlier, a certain kind of courage to traverse this path of awakening. I think that at times many of us view experiences and view our life as a string of blessings or maybe a string of curses. Through our practice, through our life as our practice. We learn not to get caught up in the attachment to blessings and not get caught up into the aversion to curses. With mindful presence, investigation, and clear discernment as the ground of our practice, we learn to view and to relate to life as a continual opportunity to deepen our practice and to deepen our understanding. Sometimes even in the most difficult circumstances, another opportunity. Sometimes it's, oh no, another opportunity. With all of this, all of it affording us the amazing opportunity of awakening. And I think if we're really, truly candid, we may occasionally feel like a spiritual warrior in the process. So what is a curse? What is a blessing? As our practice takes deeper and deeper root, its blessings begin to permeate all corners of our life. Mindfulness and investigation of states grounded in interest and an open-hearted, non-judgmental receptivity is our guide through what at times may feel like an impenetrable forest of experience. We can't depend on something outside of our own, expect or depend on something outside of our own mind, our own heart, or we can't depend or expect someone else to do it for us. The invitation is ehipasika, as I've already said. Ehipasika, come and see. When we connect and clearly see, the next step is right in front of us, just one step at a time. Some years ago, at this time of year, I went for a day-long hike with a friend up in the mountains here in the Taos Ski Valley. And my hiking buddy is a longtime Dhamma practitioner, and we like to hike in silence. And usually we walk alone, though not very far along the trail from each other. And often we only speak together during our rest breaks and our lunchtime. Hiking like this for me and for my friend are some of our most treasured non-retreat practice times. There's a very deep and connected relationship through all of the sense doors to the surrounding world, to our bodily sensations in relationship to our movement, and to the feelings and all the various states of mind and heart that come and go as we take our time making our way up the trail, and then of course back down the trail. So during this particular hike, as we were wending our way up through this particular mountain, Rocky Mountain landscape, two young people came up behind us and they were moving really fast. They were almost running up the mountain. And they each had a small yellow plastic object in their hand, which they were quite intently holding up and out in front of them. Well, we exchanged cursory hellos, and I asked them what the yellow plastic object was. And they said, it's a GPS, as if I would know what that was. They were in such a hurry that there was no opportunity to ask, what is a GPS? Now, this was quite some years ago. It was before GPSs became so widely used, and I finally learned what it was. So my friend that I was hiking with knew a little bit about this, and she said that the GPS is an instrument that tells you where you are. Well, as soon as she said this, we both looked at each other with a kind of amazement, and we started to laugh. And we laughed and laughed and laughed for quite a while. the experience somehow tickling the funny bone of each of us. That particular day, where my friend and I were, was being connected with and known over and over and over again in so many ways and on so many levels as we were slowly making our way up the mountain. The intermediary of a global positioning system seemed so silly at that point and in that setting. And a poem by David Wagner called Lost. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here. And you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes. Listen. It answers, I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again saying, here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree, a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. So again, ehipasika, come and see. Come and see for yourself. The Buddha, with his great clarity and compassion, spoke about what he called the nutriment for the arising development and fulfillment and perfection of the factor of investigation of states. He said that we must give a wise and careful attention to both beneficial and unbeneficial states. Beneficial states such as loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity, as well as to the so-called hindrances, sleepiness, restlessness, the wanting mind, the aversive mind, the doubting mind. He also said it's essential that we give this wise and careful attention to states of suffering, and also to the cause of suffering itself, and to the end of suffering. And again, the Buddha directs us towards seeing and knowing the particular individual characteristics of beneficial or wholesome states, as well as seeing and knowing the individual characteristics of unwholesome, unbeneficial states. He also directs us towards seeing and knowing the three universal characteristics of all states of body, mind, and heart. The impermanence, the essential unsatisfactoriness, and the selfless, empty nature of all mental and bodily experiences. All of this, the Buddha tells us, is the primary nutriment for the arising, development, fulfillment, and perfection of the enlightenment factor of investigation. Investigation, clear discernment, is primarily what counters delusion, is primarily what counters ignorance. We're also told to ask appropriate questions, and that it's helpful to reflect on the very real possibility of deep understanding, of deep insight. We're encouraged to associate with people who have understanding, and it's suggested by the Buddha that we don't spend too much time with people who don't have understanding. The Buddha spoke in a very beautiful way about the internal purification of the mind and the heart as being, and these are his words, like the light of a lamp's flame that arises with a clean lamp bowl, wick, and oil as its support. And that bodily and mental formations become evident and clear to one who tries to comprehend them with a purified base, meaning a mind, a heart that's cleansed through the ethical behavior of sila and the purification of the heart and mind that the development of concentration facilitates. Investigation and clear discrimination of bodily and mental states is a requisite for awakening, a requisite for the arising of wisdom. And so in this light, the enlightenment factor, the awakening factor of investigation is spoken about as the wisdom factor. The difference between the person the person with a mind unconsciously steeped in me, mine, and I, and the one who lives, sees, and knows through a mind steeped in mindful awareness and investigation of states, is that within the narrowness of a mind that's steeped in me, mine, and I, there's a very strong and sticky identification with all of the hopes and all of the fears that arise, which is a very, very painful place to live one's life from. When the mind, the heart, is steeped in the factors of mindfulness and investigation, one isn't very often caught or thrown off, not very often ruffled or confused by inner and outer events. We see what is. We know it beyond the seeming appearances. We aren't caught nearly as often by the hopes and the fears in relationship to the moment's experiences. They come. And we let them go as they naturally do anyway. Our practice affords us the great potential of not clinging and not being identified with and attached to experience all of the time. What is just what is, moment to moment to moment, more and more often. And as I'm sure you know, at least to some degree, it's impossible to think our way out of tension. It's impossible to think our way out of stress. It's impossible to think our way out of confusion. It's impossible to think our way out of suffering. And it's impossible to think our way into really, truly letting go. We can't think our way to liberation. The great Indian teacher Nisargadatta Maharaj tells us the mind, the thinking mind, is interested in what happens, while awareness, meaning a mindful and discerning presence, is interested in the mind, the heart. And he goes on to say, the child is after the toy, but the mother watches the child, not the toy. Awakening is beyond or beneath the intellect. It's beyond or beneath concept. So how can we possibly use concept to get us there? When insight is born, when understanding is born, it's deep and integrated and simple. It's cellular, as someone once described their experience to me. With investigation, we move out of the dark and come into the light of wisdom. In reference to his own awakening, the Buddha said, the I was born, the I is born, knowledge was born, wisdom was born, understanding was born, light was born. As awakening beings, we're moving towards our inheritance from the Buddha by simply becoming a real human being. A real human being. A description my Burmese teacher Sayadaw U Pandita used for one who is awake. A real human being. And this is the greatest gift that we can offer to this world. So let's just sit silently together for a few minutes. And thank you for listening to the Dhamma. And thank you for your practice.